I think even for someone like you know someone who's really deep in the sales world, like you live and breathe making deals.
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some
Yeah.
research that kind of shifts how you think about things.
I
Right?
totally.
And that's what we're going to do today.
For sure.
Explore some research that might just challenge some of your long-held assumptions about sales.
Yeah, this is not Sales 101.
No, not at all.
This is for people who are really serious about being great at complex, high-stakes sales.
Right, like the big deal.
Yeah, the big ones.
So we're going deep today, specifically for those folks who are already experts.
Exactly.
We're going to dissect some findings that, might even make you rethink some of the fundamental techniques that you've built your success on.
Yeah, love it.
And we're going to talk about insights that are based on data,
Yes.
rigorous analysis, not
Yeah.
just, someone's opinion or a gut feeling.
Exactly. Real data.
So the foundation of our deep dive today is Neil Rackham's Spin Selling.
Great.
Now, what makes this book so unique is that it's based on a huge study, like massive,
Huge.
over 35,000 sales calls,
Wow.
analyzed over 12 years.
That's a lot of data.
It is, and it's focused specifically on professional selling
The real deal.
in major accounts, so those big complex sales we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So get ready, because we're going to challenge some of the things you think you know about closing deals,
Love it.
managing objections, even the way we ask questions.
Should be fun.
And we're going to see how these play out in those really critical, high-value sales.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's jump right in.
All right.
So let's think about the traditional sales call, right?
Sure.
How it's usually structured. You open the call, investigate needs, present benefits, handle objections, and then you close, right?
Yep. Classic structure.
The classic structure, yeah.
Yeah.
But Rackham's research gives us a really interesting way to look at how well each of these stages actually works, especially when you're dealing with those big, important sales.
Right, where the pressure's on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So think about opening a call.
Okay.
The traditional advice is to build rapport quickly, right?
Right, make a connection.
Yeah, connect on a personal level, maybe find some common interests, and then, boom, hit them with your value proposition.
You got it.
Right.
Right.
Make a good first impression.
Standard playbook.
It's like the standard playbook.
Going
Right?
okay.
But the data actually suggests that maybe all this emphasis on personal connection and those early benefit statements, they might not be as impactful in larger sales as they are in smaller ones.
Interesting.
So, it's not that being friendly is bad.
No, of course not.
Right. But in these big deals, you probably want to shift the focus pretty quickly to, the real business issues that are at stake.
I see what you're saying.
And I think your expertise probably already tells you that, time is precious in those high-level conversations.
It really is.
You don't want to waste time with too much small talk.
Right. Get down to business.
Exactly. Get down to business. Now, let's talk about investigating needs.
Okay.
This is where you're trying to uncover what the client is looking for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The classic teaching emphasizes using open and closed questions.
The fundamentals.
Yeah, like the fundamentals of sales, right?
Yeah.
Open-ended questions to get them talking, and enclosed questions to kind of nail down specifics.
Yep, makes sense.
But what's interesting is Rackham's research found that these classic questioning techniques, they might not be enough when you're dealing with larger sales.
Really? Why not?
Because the needs in these big deals are often way more complex,
I could see that.
right? Like it's not just one simple problem they're trying to solve.
Yeah, it's a web of issues.
A whole web of issues.
Right.
And you need a more, like a sharper tool to really get to the bottom of it.
Okay, so what's the solution?
Well, we'll get to that in a bit.
Okay.
But it involves a more deliberate and, sophisticated way of asking questions.
I'm intrigued.
So let's move on to presenting benefits. Typically, we're taught to directly link our product's features to the advantages they offer.
All right, feature benefit, classic stuff.
Like, hey, this feature will boost your efficiency by 15% or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It seems logical. And in simpler sales, it can be effective.
For sure.
But when you're dealing with major sales, the research shows that this approach, just directly linking features and advantages, it can actually fall flat.
Totally. Why is that?
Well, Rackham calls these advantages, and he found that they sometimes even make the customer skeptical.
Huh. Interesting.
In these bigger deals, you need a different kind of benefit.
Okay.
One that directly addresses a need that the customer has explicitly stated, and, importantly, that they've said is a big deal to them.
So a benefit that's tailored to their specific pain point.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm following you.
All right, now let's tackle objections.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Oh, yeah, we all love objections, right?
Sure.
But The common belief is that objections are just a sign that the customer is engaged, right?
Yeah, they're interested.
They're interested, yeah.
They're pushing back.
They're pushing back, and if you can handle them well, you can overcome them and move the sale forward.
Classic sales wisdom.
Yeah, and we're taught all these different techniques, right?
Right, all the strategies.
But here's the really interesting thing. Rackham found that the top performers in major sales,
Okay.
they actually focus more on preventing objections than on handling them.
That's interesting.
Now, that doesn't mean that objection handling skills aren't important.
I don't know, they're still useful.
They're still useful, yeah. Especially in smaller sales.
Right.
But in those larger, more complex deals,
Mm-hmm.
being able to prevent objections altogether is even more powerful.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Well, it's about really understanding the customer's needs and concerns up front.
I see it. Get ahead of the objections.
Exactly, and addressing them before they even have a chance to voice them.
That makes a lot of sense.
All right, and finally, the close.
The moment of truth.
This is where, the pressure is really on, right?
Yeah.
We're trained to use all sorts of techniques to get that commitment.
Close the deal.
Yeah, close the deal.
Yeah.
But this is where Rackham's research gets really interesting
Uh-huh.
and maybe even a little controversial.
Okay, I'm listening.
He found that those closing techniques that work so well in smaller sales,
Yeah.
they can actually backfire in larger deals.
Really?
Yeah, and sometimes they can even cost you the sale.
Wow, that's surprising.
It is surprising.
Yeah.
And the data shows that successful large sales actually involve fewer attempts to close than unsuccessful ones.
So it's not about the hard close.
Not in these big deals. It's
Wait.
more about guiding the customer towards a natural commitment.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it seems like the traditional sales process needs a bit of a makeover when it comes to these major sales.
It does.
Yeah.
And the research really highlights one stage that becomes super crucial.
Which one is that?
The investigating stage.
The fact-finding part.
Exactly. Your ability to really understand the customer's needs in depth.
Makes sense.
That is the biggest factor
Yeah.
in winning those big deals.
Okay, that's really important.
It is. And this brings us to the SPIN model.
I've heard of that.
It's a powerful framework for asking questions.
Okay, tell me more about it.
So the SPIN model breaks down the investigating stage into 4 specific types of questions.
Okay, I'm ready.
First, you have situation questions.
Situation questions, okay.
These are your basic fact-finding questions like, can you tell me about your current setup in this area? Or how many people are using this system?
Right, get the lay of the land.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, experienced salespeople, they tend to ask fewer of these.
Yeah, they probably already know a lot of that stuff.
Right. They've done their homework.
Right, makes sense.
Then we move on to problem questions.
Problem questions.
These are designed to uncover the customer's pain points, those things that are causing them frustration or difficulty.
Right, the problems they're facing.
Exactly. So an example might be, are you having any issues with the speed of your current process? Or is this system causing any bottlenecks in your workflow?
Got it. So you're digging into their specific pain points.
Precisely. And the goal here is to get the customer to express what Rackham calls implied needs.
Implied needs, what are those?
These are statements that hint at an underlying problem.
Okay, so it's not a direct statement of need, but it suggests that there's a problem.
Exactly. And the research shows that in larger sales,
Yeah.
simply identifying those implied needs, it's not enough.
Really? Why not?
You need to take it a step further.
Okay.
And that's where implication questions come in.
Implication questions, all right?
These questions are designed to really determine the seriousness of those problems
Right.
by linking them to their consequences.
So you're helping them see the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's say the customer mentions that they're having delays in their production process.
Okay, classic problem.
Right. An implication question might be, what impact are those delays having on your ability to meet your customers' deadlines? Or how is this affecting your overall profitability?
I see. So you're connecting the dots for them.
Yes. And those implication questions, they help increase the size and urgency of the problem in the customer's mind.
So they start to feel the pain more acutely?
Exactly. And that's important because it makes them more receptive to your solution.
Okay, that makes sense.
Do you remember that car sale example I mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think so.
It illustrates this really well.
Remind me how it goes.
So instead of just saying your car is old, which is kind of a weak statement, right?
Yeah, not very compelling.
The salesperson could use implication questions like, with your car being 7 years old, are you starting to see higher repair costs? Or, given the mileage, are you worried about its reliability on long trips?
Okay, so they're not just stating a fact. they're getting the customer to think about the potential downsides.
Exactly. And those questions force the customer to consider the negative consequences of holding on to their old car.
Which makes them more likely to want a new one.
Exactly.
Is there
All right, now, the final piece of the spin-in model is need payoff questions.
need payoff questions? Okay.
These are all about shifting the focus to solutions and the positive outcomes they can deliver.
So you're getting them to think about the benefits.
Yes, but here's the key. You're not just stating the benefits yourself.
Okay.
You're guiding the customer to articulate those benefits themselves.
I see. So they're selling themselves on the solution.
Exactly.
Clever.
So, for example, you might say, would it be helpful to have a system that could reduce those delivery delays by 15%? Or how would it impact your team's morale if you could eliminate those bottlenecks?
Okay, so you're getting them to verbalize the value.
Exactly.
And that makes them more likely to buy in.
Exactly. And the research shows a strong correlation between the number of need payoff questions a salesperson asks and their success in larger sales.
So the more they get the customer to articulate the benefits, the better they do.
Exactly. Top performers ask way more of these questions.
Okay, that's powerful.
Now, you mentioned that the student sequence can sometimes happen naturally, right?
Yeah, it does.
So do you think we always need to consciously plan it out?
Well, I think skilled salespeople often use elements of Stir Dustbin without even realizing it.
Yeah, like it's just part of their natural style.
Right.
But consciously using the model, especially in those complex sales, it can really make a difference.
I can see that.
It's like having a roadmap.
Yeah, a guide.
Yeah, a guide to help you navigate the conversation and uncover those explicit needs.
Makes sense.
All right, let's move on to rethinking benefits.
Okay.
We touched on this earlier.
Right, we talked about the different types of benefit.
Yeah, but let's dive a little deeper,
All right.
especially into how features, advantages, and benefits,
Yeah.
as defined by Rackham, play out in larger sales.
Got it. So let's break it down.
Okay, so a feature, it's basically a fact about your product or service.
Okay.
Like, our software has a built-in reporting dashboard.
Right. Just a factual statement.
Exactly. An advantage explains how that feature can be used or how it might help the customer in general.
Okay.
So, for example, that reporting dashboard will give you real-time insights into your sales performance.
Okay, so it's a potential benefit, but not specific to any particular need.
Right. And then a benefit, as Rackham defines it, it directly addresses an explicit need that the customer has already stated is important to them.
Okay, so it's a solution to a specific problem they've identified.
Exactly. So if the customer said, we're struggling to track our sales metrics effectively, then the benefit would be, our reporting dashboard will give you the real-time data you need to accurately track your sales and identify areas for improvement.
Okay, I see the difference.
So it's much more targeted.
Uh-huh.
It's not just a general positive. It's directly addressing their pain point.
Right, and that's more effective in larger sales. It's because they're looking for solutions to specific problems.
Exactly. And the research shows that those traditional benefits, which are often just advantages, they can actually be perceived negatively in larger sales.
Really? Why is that?
Because they sound generic.
Okay.
Like you haven't really taken the time to understand their specific needs.
Yeah, they come across as canned.
Exactly. And you mentioned earlier that the impact of features, advantages, and benefits changes throughout the sales cycle, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point.
So let's talk about that.
Ah.
Features, they tend to have a pretty low impact throughout the whole process.
They're just facts.
Yeah, just facts.
Right.
Advantages, they might generate some interest early on, but as the sale progresses, they become less effective.
Because the customer is more focused on their specific needs.
Exactly. And then you have benefits, those tied to explicit needs.
Yeah.
They have a consistently high impact throughout the entire sales cycle.
Because they're addressing the customer's core problems.
Precisely.
That makes a lot of sense.
Now, this helps explain why some product launches, even if they're initially met with excitement,
Yeah.
they might struggle later on.
Right, they lose momentum.
They lose momentum because they focus too much on features and advantages and not enough on addressing those fundamental customer needs.
Right. They haven't made the connection between the product and the solution.
Exactly.
So when you're launching a new product, it's crucial to emphasize the problems it solves.
Absolutely.
Like, not just the cool features it has.
And to use those spin questions to really uncover and develop those needs.
Right. Get the customer talking about their pain points.
Exactly.
Okay. That's really helpful.
All right, let's shift gears to objections.
Back to objections.
We talked about the importance of preventing them in larger sales, right?
Right. Get ahead of them.
But can you explain why the traditional focus on objection handling might not be the best approach in these situations?
Yeah, so the research actually suggests that objections are often a direct result of presenting advantages too early.
Okay.
When you start talking about what your product can do before you've fully established a need,
Uh-huh.
you're essentially giving the customer reasons to object.
I see. They haven't bought into the problem yet,
Exactly.
so they're not ready for the solution.
Right, and by rushing to present your solution,
Yeah.
you might be creating the very objections you then have to overcome.
That makes sense.
But if you use those implication and need payoff questions effectively,
Uh-huh.
you can build a strong sense of value in the customer's mind and uncover their explicit needs.
Right.
And when you then present your solution, it's seen as a direct response to those needs.
I see. So the objections never even come up because you've addressed the underlying concerns.
Precisely. So objection prevention.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making such a strong case for your solution
Yeah.
that there are fewer opportunities for objections to arise in the first place.
Okay, that's a powerful concept.
Now, the last stage in that traditional sales model we talked about was closing, right?
Good. Closing the deal. But we've learned that the classic closing techniques, they can be a bit risky in major sales.
Yeah, they can backfire.
So how should we approach getting commitment in these complex deals?
Well, the key is to shift your mindset from closing as a single event
Uh-huh.
to closing as a series of smaller steps.
Okay, I'm listening.
Rackham calls these advances.
Advances. That's
An
right.
advance is an agreement on an action that moves the sale forward.
Okay, so it's a step towards the final decision,
Exactly.
but not the final decision itself.
Right. So examples of advances could be, getting the customer to agree to a product demo,
Okay.
or scheduling a meeting with a higher level decision maker, or starting a trial period.
Got it.
Now, he contrasts these with what he calls continuations.
Continuations.
These are statements from the customer that sound positive,
Uh-huh.
but they don't actually represent a commitment to any specific action.
So they're not really moving the sale forward.
Right. They're more like, that's interesting, or we'll think about it. Yeah, I've heard those before.
We've all heard those before.
Yeah.
So in a larger sale,
Mm-hmm.
success in a single meeting isn't necessarily getting a signed contract.
Okay.
It's about securing that advance, that next step.
I see. So it's about making progress.
Exactly. And to get those advances, there are 3 things you need to do.
Okay, tell me more.
First, you need to make sure you've addressed all the customer's key concerns.
Right. No lingering doubts.
No lingering
Well,
doubts, yeah.
Okay.
Second, you need to summarize the benefits, specifically how your solution addresses their explicit needs.
Remind them why this is a good shit.
Exactly.
Okay.
And third, you need to propose a logical next step at the advance.
So you're giving them a clear call to action?
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And going into each meeting, you should have a very clear call objective in mind.
Right. What do you want to achieve?
What specific advance are you aiming for?
Okay, be specific.
Be specific, yeah.
Got it.
Because without a clear objective,
Uh-huh.
you're kind of just wandering aimlessly. Yeah.
No direction.
Now, lastly, I want to touch on something that the research really emphasizes.
Okay.
It's not just about the big strategies.
Mm-hmm.
It's also about the small details.
So little things.
The little things, yeah.
Okay.
Rackham found that success in sales often comes down to the accumulation of those tiny behavioral details within the conversation.
Interesting.
It's how you phrase a question,
Okay.
your tone of voice, your body language, those subtle things.
The nuances.
The nuances, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is why it's so important for even experienced salespeople
Mm-hmm.
to review their calls in detail.
To analyze what worked and what didn't.
Exactly.
Ah,
Top performers, they make this a habit.
they're constantly looking for ways to improve.
They are. They're always trying to refine their approach.
That's a great takeaway.
And if you're looking to improve your sales skills, Rackham offers these 4 golden rules for learning skills.
Okay, what are they?
First, practice only one new behavior at a time.
Don't try to change everything at once.
Don't overwhelm yourself. Yeah.
Right.
Second, practice in low-risk situations first.
Yeah, get comfortable with it.
Yeah. Get comfortable before you try it in a high-stakes meeting. Third, quantity leads to quality.
Practice, practice, practice.
Exactly. The more you do it, the better you get.
Okay.
And fourth, get feedback on your performance.
See what others observe.
Yeah, ask a colleague or a mentor to watch you and give you some pointers.
Great advice.
So even for our expert listeners today,
Mhm.
there's always room for improvement, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's consciously practicing those S-Spin questions or refining your approach to securing commitment,
Always learning.
always learning.
Yeah.
So to sum it all up for our audience, especially those who are already experts,
Okay.
success in large, complex sales requires a different mindset.
Uh-huh.
It's about really understanding the customer's world through those S-PIN questions,
Right.
addressing their explicit needs with tailored benefits, preventing objections before they even come up, and securing those advances, those incremental steps towards the final decision.
Makes perfect sense.
And it makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
Even with years of experience,
Uh-huh.
it's valuable to look at your own sales practices through the lens of this research.
For sure.
Maybe analyze your past wins and losses.
Yeah.
See how they line up with the SPIN model.
Great idea.
And for those who want to dive even deeper, I highly recommend checking out Neil Rackham's Spin Selling.
Definitely.
It's got a wealth of information and insights.
It's a classic.
And hopefully this deep dive has given everyone, even those at the top of their game,
Yeah.
a fresh perspective
Uh-huh.
on the art and science of winning those major sales.
It's been really insightful.
It has.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I think we've all learned a lot today.
I know, I have.
And as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.
See you then.